It's the Samwich. The Samwich is here. We're on with the Samwich. Woo! Hey there, Tots. We are with a very special sandwich today, Dr. Megan Fleming. Yay! Dr. Megan is a nationally recognized certified sex and relationships expert. She has worked with individuals and couples for over 20 years now, teaching them skills and strategies to achieve sex and relationships I think we all long for. As we all probably will see by the end of this tale, Dr. Megan is known for her practical advice and easy-to-follow guidance. She has been featured on Anderson Cooper, Oprah Winfrey Network, MSNBC, Cosmopolitan, Men's Health, Maxim, and the New York Times, among others. And today, we are lucky enough that she will be adding A Tale of Two Sams to that list. So welcome, Dr. Megan, and thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to jump in.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you here. We have so many questions, and I think this is going to be really fun. The first one, we just kind of wanted to dive in and see what is the most common relationship problem or sex issue that you get with clients, and does it differ between women and men, or is it kind of the same?
I mean, it's a great question. I think the biggest thing in some capacity that I see is what we call sort of the mixed match levels of sexual desire or desire discrepancy, which again, it's very normative in anybody's lifespan and or in the course of a relationship. At certain points in time, who is the higher libido partner can change, but more often than not, it's kind of like a constant. And therefore, I sort of say when sex is going well, it's a small part of a relationship, but when sex is a problem, or because it's like you feel like you're not having it, or your partner's not interested and you're feeling rejection, like all of those complicated emotions, unfortunately, that kind of a sex life can cast a shadow over the relationship as a whole and really becomes a challenge globally.
Yeah,
that's
for
like
sure.
Funny, Sam. You said that before. You were like, oh, I'm going to ask her if, what happens if one person's, one partner's sex drive is higher than the other's? Like, is there a way to like tackle that? And in my head, I'm like, is there a way to tackle that? Do you think that's something that she could answer? And it's so funny that it seems like it's the main thing you talk about, right? If that's the biggest problem. So yay.
Absolutely. And I think it's an important thing around that to give people that sense of hope, right? Because there's so many things, typically in my experience, people haven't yet tried. And I think the biggest piece of information that we can give people listening is that, I sort of say it's like the number one biggest sex mistake. We think that you have to have desire, like I'm feeling turned on, I'm feeling horny, I have a sense of wanting. That desire is the precursor to arousal and to being open and receptive to sex. And so I think the most important thing, because this is true, I would say for the majority of women, unless it's like the beginning of the relationship, the romance phase, the limerence, like all the dopamine and all the good,
right,
feel good, right? Neurochemicals that more often than not is, working caretakers, women are sort of running on empty and in some ways have themselves at the bottom of the list. We can talk about that too. But I sort of say that sexually their partner approaches and they're just like, their immediate visceral response is like, no, they're just not feeling it. And I'm like, well, what's one small thing you might be able to say yes to? Because we know from the research, and this is from Rosemary Bassan, that, if you say yes, like say it's a back massage, it's like, or stroking the hair or just holding each other, it's like if it feels good and nice, the body's like right, gets turned on,
right?
And through the arousal in the body, the desire kicks in. It's why so many women will say to me, like, I don't know why it's hard to get started, but then afterwards I'm like, why did it take us so long? Why don't we do that more often? Right. And that's really when you recognize that is the role of responsive desire. So learning to say yes from a no, right? Not that it's a guarantee, because I don't know, and you don't know how you're going to feel till you're in the moment. You can't command arousal, but it's really about creating the right conditions.
Right. Does that like go into kind of like communicating in bed as well? Because I think that, at least for myself, I know that when I have good sex, I'm like, want to do that again and again and again, but if it's not hitting the spot, so to speak, figuratively and literally, then I'm more inclined to be like, I'm tired, I'm going to go to bed, so how do you say that kind of nicely and communicate with your partner without making them feel like, you might be like, as like my ex told me one time, this is a true story, he told me that I sounded like a command sergeant. I was like, sorry, I guess. Just trying to help you find the clit, but all right.
Right. Yeah. Like I think sometimes there's a little bit of anxiety or frustration when you're really into someone and you're into your partner, but they're just not
Doing it.
getting it. They're not doing it for you. And there's a little like you don't want to sound or you don't want to offend them and say,
Not doing it.
I have not orgasmed. How do you do that? How
How
do
do you
you
like
direct
tackle that?
them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think first it's to it's great and fantastic. You both know, right, your turn ons. And one of the things I often do is like women can outsource their pleasure as if their partner's supposed to mind read and know what feels good in your body. So I think first and foremost, it's our personal responsibility to know what feels good and how we get turned on. Because another thing I often see is anorgasmia, right? Women that have never had an orgasm on their own and or with a partner. And that's kind of
Stressed out.
globally, not just the 2/3 of women that don't with penetration alone. So I think a big piece around this is, again, knowing your turn-ons and what gives you pleasure. So A, you can communicate that, but then to your point, it's like how, because we don't want it to come across as telling, nagging, complaining, right? I
Command
always
sergeant.
sort of say, command sergeant. I always sort of say, it's like we express ourselves from the wish and the longing, right? It's like, oh, I would really love if we could, or, when you just did X, Y, or Z, oh my God, that felt so amazing. So positive reinforcement for what they're doing right, and or this is the role of either mutual masturbation, putting their hand on your hand, or maybe with your toy, right? But like,
Right.
it's sort of an opportunity because I've been doing this work 20 years. Your partner wants to give you pleasure. In fact, so much so that some of them get performance pressure, and
Right.
performance demands that can impact their arousal in a negative response. So, in a negative way. So I think to always realize that you both are on the same page. You want the win-win, right? You both are. To me, the basics of sex is giving, receiving pleasure, and so it's really about saying, I really like it when, or I read in Cosmo and, they were talking about this new sex technique or this new, are you interested? That sounds really, there's so
Right.
many ways to start these difficult conversations where it
Mhm.
doesn't have to come from a complaint or a
Yeah.
frustration.
Right.
That's a good idea, like referencing like something maybe read or, like I feel like sometimes you do that with like other aspects of life, to kind of tackle like the weird questions or whatever.
Yeah.
And instead we never do that with sex. Like that definitely I feel like I'm like right now I'm like jotting down notes like I will use that. Um but you kind of touched upon this, and this is something we spoke about in actually one of our first episodes because it was kind of a joke slash it's kind of a thought that I've had that I feel like other women probably have had. Nervous penis. What we said that we got a lot of kickback on from men, positive and negative, was that nervous penis is really kind of a myth in our eyes, right? And some men were like, yeah, I agree, it's a myth. Like if I'm turned off by a girl, then I'm not, and I'm going to say, oh, I'm nervous and I can't get aroused. But some men were like, that's not true. I genuinely have been nervous. I have, and I'm sure to each its own. But, is there something that we can debunk as women that maybe there is a turnoff and maybe they're just using nervous as an excuse? Or is there,
I
what's
should
like your take on it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from personal, and I said this back in the episode when we first discussed this. I do think that there are situations where guys are just nervous, like they're intimidated by us. They like just really have been waiting for this moment for so long. Not to
Mhm.
sound like we're so
We're like so amazing.
amazing, but I think that there's a fear for some guys, like what if I fuck this up? You know,
Right.
they want to impress us so bad. So I guess like you were saying before, they want to give us pleasure so badly that
Mhm.
that pressure almost makes their performance worse.
Is that
Absolutely. I
true?
mean, in my experience, it's almost like the unspoken anxiety amongst men, which is performance anxiety or the performance demand. I mean, penetration's like batter up at the plate, right?
Right.
And it's like it's they call it choking for a reason, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's got to happen now, and that feeling is constricted energy, constricts blood flow, and guess what happens? Of course, lose arousal and erection. And And it's not uncommon. They probably had this experience at least once before, maybe with the previous partner. So they're not coming in neutral. I mean, the foundation of arousal is relaxation, right? That is sort of baseline. If you're already anticipating, again, anytime it's new, there's normal anxiety with a new partner. But on top of that, you're questioning, you don't have confidence, right, in your ability to give pleasure. I always sort of say focus on hands and mouth and not just your penis. But that it's that pressure that creates the anticipatory anxiety. I sort of say in their head, it's like they're spectating, evaluating, how's it going? And if they're losing fullness, like, oh my God, like this banter inside their head, there's nothing erotic or sexy about it.
Right.
And
That makes
so
sense.
it's really helping these guys focus more on, again, the basics, which is pleasure, not performance, as well as, I often sort of say giving them confidence as a lover in your hands and your mouth or a sex toy, because you can't command yourself to be aroused, erect, any more than you can command yourself to be sleepy. It's a reflex. It's really about the right conditions being there, in which case, like, no pressure on, or she's got her period. It's like, there's no problem. Why? Because there's no pressure.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So does that kind of go into our question though, Sammy, of we were kind of thinking maybe this is us selfishly thinking this because like maybe men really don't care, but there's so many times that I've, had sex with a guy and I've like woken up and been like, oh my God, I didn't realize like I wasn't completely shaved, or like I wasn't, oh my God, look at my cellulite, or like, like my back fat, like he was definitely looking at that. That's why he didn't get turned on. That's why he didn't get aroused. Is that in our heads? Have you ever heard that this is something that men are actually triggered by, that like, oh no, they smelled like, I don't know. Like, is there like something that, I don't know, it adds to my orgasm anxiety? Does it add to theirs?
Well, again, when you say it inhibits your arousal,
Yeah.
right? For sure. And, I've been doing this 20 years. I honestly think that we as women bring attention to the parts of our bodies we don't like that much or want to be different, that they don't generally notice or see, but we bring it up so much, they start to notice and see. Like, so we're sort of shooting ourselves in our own foot. To your
As
point,
we do.
as we often do. But I think the biggest thing is to recognize it, and again, and this is my experience, but that consistently, it is not a lack of attraction for the partner. It is what's going on inside their own head, right? Because, you know, so this is what often happens, even when if they get aroused, then they feel the pressure, they got to use it before they lose it, so they rush to penetration because they don't feel like they can count on their arousal, their erection, right? And this might lead to what can look like premature ejaculation, or she's just not ready yet.
Right.
So it's really about figuring out how, as a couple, to introduce relaxation back into the experience. And I often, and this is true for most sex therapists, one of the first things we do is take penetration off the table, because then you don't have the anticipatory anxiety about what's going to happen, or what, often I see avoidance, right? If I don't know how it's going to go, I'd rather not have sex than it go badly. So then there's a lot of avoidant behavior that can show up. And so when you know that what's not going to happen, it helps you to relax and to be more present in the moment and enjoying all the ways you can, getting back to the basics, you can give your partner pleasure.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say, me personally, I think foreplay is probably the best part, I think.
Right.
Just like the build up towards it. And I think sometimes, like you were saying, guys and even girls, well, probably rarely for girls, but guys get so excited, or like they're like, oh, well, I'm hard now. We got to do this now before I freak out and it's gone. What advice would you give to guys that feel that way?
Well, sort of is exactly as I do. It's like helping them identify the pattern, right? Are they even aware of this pressure? Like, oh my God, I got to, in a sense, use it before I lose it, right? Are they even aware of that consciously? And then it's to really help them realize, like, nothing has to happen right now. And really getting beyond that point of feeling, because to your point, I sort of say men are like microwaves and women are like crock pots. Typically they need a lot more
I
time
love
to
that.
get
I
aroused.
like that. Yeah.
And so it's incredibly important. It's like, just because you're ready to go doesn't mean she is. And ultimately, again, because your intention and desire is to give her pleasure, again, they're just too, in my experience, they're just too in their heads, and they're too outcome focused. I mean, it's our culture, right? It's about outcomes. It's about performance. It's about orgasm. We've really honestly forgotten the basics of pleasure, which, as I said before, it's like coming back to that foundation, I think can be really helpful for couples, because sex and sexuality in my mind is, first of all, aliveness, right? But also it's like, how as adults can we play? Like sex is a great play space.
Yeah.
And, you know, not getting into sexual scripts and ruts, which is, you know, what happens to a number of couples. And I think it's because sex is such a challenging conversation. It's like you bring a couple together and it's like everything on your menu and everything on their menu, and everything that overlaps stays on the menu. Anything you tried it didn't go well falls off the menu. And chances are you tried it once, it didn't go well, it's off the menu. Versus what I say, try again, or try 3 months down the road or a year down the road. Like my husband and I tried role play in the beginning, dating, and it was just like, it freaked me out because I'm not attracted to strangers, and he was, you know, a stranger picking me up. It took 10 years before we revisited that, because you know, and it's like, in hindsight, like I've come to learn, like, because I ask about sex toys and sexual practices all the time. Most people, if something doesn't go well, not even less than optimally, you know, they just are like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. I'm like, well, try again, because
that's all aspects of life though too, not even just in sex, you know.
100%, 100%. Like fear and anxiety, right, trump and then lead to avoidance. And interestingly enough, right, growth is always in the discomfort. So you want to think about that. Like I have this traffic light system: red light, yellow light, green light. Like green light is vanilla and chocolate ice cream, your missionary, your being on top, your favorite positions. But ideally, I want you playing in the yellow, like I don't know, is it green? Like it's not red, stop sign paint, you know, like, you know, that's like the not for now or ever. But the yellow is like, you know, that sense of excite, terrify, you know, not quite knowing where it's going to go. But like I sort of say, your committed relationship is like the foundation, the safety net for you to sort of explore and push each other's boundaries a little bit, again, in a way that is enthusiastically consensual, right? And it's just about expanding our repertoire. You know, like I think about the Greek diner menu, right? Like you don't want the small.
I love a Greek diner menu. See, I really do.
That's really funny. So, but would you relate that to also maybe men having one orgasm basically per you know, I guess intercourse,
sexual encounter.
Yeah, sexual encounter in that moment. I don't know. And then women can have, you know, 5. You know, it's that. Do you think that's why sometimes we put so much pressure on? Did the man have an orgasm? Also, you could see the man's orgasm. You can't really see the woman's orgasm. You know, like.
You don't necessarily see. You mean you more like
you don't necessarily. There you go. But you know what? Like, would you say that kind of plays into the fact that we feel so much pressure as women to get this job done? You know, we get this. We got to make sure that they get their one orgasm, and we can have like 5 later by ourselves. Is that like silly, like for us to think or feel?
Well, the fact that you want to do them by yourselves, you know.
Yep. Big problem.
I want to talk to you more about why you don't think you can do it together. But anyway.
Yeah, well, that's like what I'm interested in. Like that, to me, it's like, I feel like no matter what, a guy, for the most part, is going to orgasm. Like it's much
unless
easier
he has
for
delayed
them.
ejaculation, but go ahead.
Right. Unless, you know, what is that? I'm curious.
Yeah.
Well, delayed ejaculation is like the difficulty in some cases, sort of in extreme cases, the inability to orgasm, sort of with penetration alone. And that can have everything to do from what we call idiosyncratic masturbation styles, which is sort of just like a vibrator. A man can't duplicate that stimulation if he isn't using his hand and say is rubbing up against pillows or sometimes shag carpeting. The point is you're not going to duplicate that stimulation. So again, that would I say is the minority of these cases. More often than not, it might be an antidepressant like the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Again, they have sexual side effects both for men and women. So again, often it's more like delayed ejaculation than like it just takes longer, and you know, sometimes to a point where without lube and things like that, it might potentially get uncomfortable for a partner.
So wait, now I'm interested in like a side note. So guys don't always masturbate with like their hand, is what you're saying. Like some guys, like you said, will like kind of like hump a pillow.
They're using their body weight. So we sort of think of it as like friction, like the 3 Fs, like friction, frenulum, and friction, frenulum, and I'm missing my 3rd F. Force. force or pressure, right?
Huh.
Because the idea is, and that's why they have sort of male masturbation, sort of sleeves, and just like I mean, a number of different companies make them, but Fleshlight's probably the one we know most. Tanga has a number of products as well. But again, it's like, in my mind, it's like you have to create the conditions that a partner can duplicate, right? The sensation of their hands, mouth, and or vagina.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I completely lost track what I was even going to ask. Oh, so,
Sorry. Didn't mean to derail.
no, that's okay.
We're like into it.
Yeah. I love
We're in the yellow zone.
yeah. So like I was saying, guys could, for the most part, unless they have this delayed ejaculation, will orgasm. Women, I feel like it's not always going to happen, just because if it's a new partner, like you said, I feel like for me or most girls personally, I rarely will orgasm the first time with like a new partner, just because
I have never.
so new, it's so different.
And you're not as relaxed. Again, foundation of arousal is relaxation, right?
Relaxation. Do you think it is valid to, something we say on this podcast is valid salad, it's like our little thing. Would you say it's valid salad to say to a guy after he orgasms, and you haven't yet,
Hello?
I haven't yet, would you mind? Or is it kind of like, okay, he came, he's done. They call it, what do they call it? A refraction period?
Refractory period.
Refractory. Yeah, if you could just speak a little bit on that.
Sure. I mean, first of all, 100%, like from, again, this would be an advocate for your pleasure, whether it happens on the front end, the back end, and or both, right? But it's that idea. I say this is also true. Like if, say, a man loses arousal, or there's, he, in the middle of penetration, loses erection, right? It's like, does the experience end, is my first question. And often it does, because of, in that case, frustration or disappointment. But even so, I'm like, well, shift, gears, right? Like you can still focus on her pleasure. And so whether or not you've had difficulties with erection, or he's already ejaculated and he's come, it's I see it as an opportunity, right? Yeah. To continue to give your partner pleasure. Now, that being said, this is in some ways true for men and women. Once you have an orgasm, prolactin is released, which is kind of like makes you a little sleepy, which is why like the stereotype is men orgasm and roll over. So there is a little to be said about prolactin, and depending
you
on
said
what time,
it, not us.
what time of night it might be, and again, rest and relax if they're exhausted. But again, this is where your sex toys can really come into play, because again, women, 2/3 of women don't orgasm with the penetration alone, right? They need additional clitoral stimulation. So that can be a bullet vibrator, a cock ring with a vibrator. It could be your hands. There are many ways to be adding it, but importantly, that women know what brings them to orgasm, and they're advocates for that.
Right. And I don't think there's like anything wrong with also like making sure it happens for yourself, on the first time. And that's something that I've been trying to remember myself, because I'm trying to be sexy and like cool the first time I'm having sex, and like making sure like my like stomach's like not like hanging over, like but like realistically I should be focused on like, this guy's about to get off and I should get off too. Like, let me get to DJing, like, you know what I mean? Like,
DJ.
if he's not gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. Like,
Yeah.
and there isn't a problem with that, I feel like, is what you're saying, right, Dr. Megan?
Absolutely. I mean, I think things should be by your bedstand, lube, right?
Yeah.
Condoms, if practicing safe sex, any preference of sex toys. It's like, it's your your play kit. You want to have it available and accessible.
So
go ahead.
I totally agree with that. And I would say, like, me and Sam are super open. We talk about like sex all the time. And I would say we're pro sex people. Like, we want girls to masturbate, and we want girls to have lube and toys and like know themselves sexually. But I feel like still in 2020, a lot of girls are not up to that speed yet. And I almost feel like some guys, or like guys in the past maybe that I've had relationships with, when they like realize that I'm so kind of like open to all this stuff and comfortable with myself, it's like, it's a little new to them. So sometimes I feel like when I'm with, a new partner, like I don't just want to like bust out the lube or bust out the toy, because I'm like, like this is, they're going to be like,
don't want to like feel embarrassed.
Yeah. Like I don't,
So you bring up some great points. And one is that when we introduce something new, generally do it outside of the bedroom. It's not like here's my new sex toy, because that's just going to be like out of nowhere and out of sort of context. So I think it's just to sort of say, hey, again, it could be I read in Cosmo, or, I just want you to know, because again, this is an interesting thing about sex toys. Sometimes they want to be like, it's just ours. It's not something you've used to play with somebody else, right? Like there's this whole, etiquette right around sex toys. But I think it's important to say, like, this is something that I really enjoy, it gives me pleasure, would you be interested in our incorporated into sort of our sex play or experiences? And interesting, it was just this past week, Betty Dodson, 91, we consider the mother of masturbation. She's been running these body sex workshops since the like 1960s, early 70s. So this is the work, continuing to educate women about owning their own pleasure, because I mean, she's coordinated with Carlin Ross, and she was just on the Goop episode. It was the third one in Gwyneth Paltrow's series, For Your Pleasure. And I think what's so fascinating about it is that, Carlin, her partner, Betty, is like, I did all the pioneering work, like literally death threats, right? Back in the 60s and the 70s, talking about female sexual empowerment. She's like, and now you get to have all the fun. So I think it's easier now than it's been, but again,
absolutely.
Even Pope Francis recently came out and said that sex is a divine pleasure. So I'm always like touting that.
The Pope said it. Come on, guys.
The Pope said it. That's why we love this Pope,
right?
It's like we have to get beyond cultural shame and guilt and or religious, and again, really helping women. It goes back to what I sort of said earlier, you're at the bottom of the to-do list. Most women don't prioritize their pleasure, period, right? I sort of say it's like everybody else, or the to-do list is the most important thing. And I'm like, but the to-do list never gets done. You don't take care of yourself. I didn't learn this till I had like 2 kids, and I was just like, if you don't resource yourself, if you're running on empty, like, you can't do anything well. It's like when you resource yourself and you come from a full cup, then it's our nature to be givers. And so I think self-care is not selfish, and it's an important thing that we educate women about taking care of their own needs and not getting to a place where they're running on empty.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of goes into the whole, a bunch of our episodes were during quarantine, and we were talking about how, we hadn't had sex, and, there's really like, the silly like guidelines that the CDC put out, like, mask for intercourse. It's like, I'm sorry, no, I'd rather just like not have it. And like, I didn't feel like, obviously we joked about how we needed it and we wanted it and we wanted to, find somebody to have sex with, whatever. But there really was just such an importance that I was like happy that I had found before quarantine happened, with like self-love and like masturbating. And I think that there was like so many of my friends that I could just like tell that they like, that was not a thing for them. People that like wrote into us just being like, I know, I'm right there with you. And I think it's just so important to know that you can masturbate, and it's a part of self-love. It's like getting a facial or getting your nails done.
Yeah. And
it's
I just
thing you need to do.
like you were saying, if you don't know what makes you feel good, your partner is definitely not going to know. Like, if you've never had an orgasm, if you never made yourself orgasm, how do you expect anyone else to help you? Or
so 2 resources. One, again, Betty's book, what I think was her first, was Sex for One. And in fact, she was in a New York Times article earlier this in the quarantine saying the safest sex is solo sex, right? Which is completely true. And then there's also the site called Oh My God Yes, and they have looked at thousands of women. This is through the Kinsey Institute. Thousands of women and the different ways that they bring themselves to orgasm. So whether it's rhythm or edging, and so again, arousal both mental and physical. This is on the technical physical side, right? So again, you're not using your biggest sex organ, your mind, but again, to whether it's a vibrator, but this is using mostly hands, like exploring, do you like, indirect or direct clitoral stimulation, right? Is there a more sensitive part of your clitoris? Like getting the mirror exercises, like really coming back to basics and learning more again. And this is the interesting thing about masturbation, right? We talk about you get tired of your partner. I'm like, but you don't get tired of your own hand, right?
Yeah.
Like most people,
it's true.
They don't vary their masturbation. Like if it works, right? They stop getting creative and curious of, if I can come this way, what if I can come that way? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's what I really would say is like, this is play, this is exploration. Find the many different ways, G-spot, external clitoris, like all the different ways that you can feel pleasure. And really, again, expanding your repertoire always.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so basically just to go off of masturbation and, you know, what helps us orgasm, I was wondering, what are your views on porn? And if there's any like sites that you would recommend that treat their workers like respectfully or
safe, you know,
safe, and just like porn in general, watching it by yourself, watching it with your partner, if you think that's helpful in any way or harmful.
Sure. Again, I think in general for both men and women, porn is a tool in a toolbox, right? As is just fantasy. And in fact, I often recommend reading erotica so that, again, porn is your spoon fed, right?
Right.
You get what you want when you want it, and you're not having to do all the work in terms of your imagination. And again, the biggest sex organ is our mind, and I think our erotic potential lies in our imagination in many ways. So I think we just don't want to get lazy with porn. And I also think that, again, it's the tool in the toolbox, right? For most people, it's a healthy relationship. It doesn't impact their desire to be with their partner, or it doesn't impact their sexual arousal or ability to orgasm. Again, for some people, we sort of refer to this more of out of control sexual behavior. Sometimes their use of porn can become problematic and or impact their ability to get aroused with a partner. So I think that that's a subgroup, but I wouldn't say that that's true for the majority. And in fact, I think research by Justin Lee Miller sort of says that, women who watch porn actually have, better sort of happier, healthier sex lives. And I can try to find the reference for that you can put in your show notes.
Awesome.
But I think it's important to realize that, again, porn in my mind is a horrible sex educator. There's also research sort of where they've asked adolescent teen boys what they'd ask for in threesomes and anal are
my God.
Yes, on the list.
My God.
And I have a 16-year-old daughter, so I'm like,
oh my God.
And it's important to realize it's like, just because you see, and educating my 13-year-old son, like just because you see something doesn't equal, right, that gives that woman pleasure, or that's what all women are interested in.
Right.
Because porn is so ubiquitous, and I think that is a lot of people's education. They somehow think it's normative when, we sort of know, if you look at sexual practices, it's not. So there's a lot of education I think we have to do for youth. And just in terms of exploring porn, and as you said, sort of ethical porn, and, that people are getting compensated, and, women are making their own, choices in terms of the work that they're doing. Sometimes it's helpful to have like a female director. But I think that there are just a whole wide range of opportunities. And I think in a healthy way, it can be a great way of exploring fantasies, and this is the thing about fantasy, it's not often politically correct. So like a common fantasy for women is a rape fantasy, right? And so if you see something that might be on the kink side or BDSM, or a threesome, I always sort of say, put a toe in the water, don't jump into the deep end, right? So maybe that looks like a blindfold, or flirting with a third person out, and then maybe making out with them, because you never know what feelings might come up in real life in real time. So when and if you ever want to take your fantasy to real life, again, is really sort of pacing your way into it, even just starting discussion about, oh my God, this fantasy really turns me on, and sharing with your partner what it is and the why, to see whether it's something you might want to, even if it's just the conversation around fantasy, much less potentially, bringing it into reality.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting what you said about how a lot of younger teens use porn as like an educator. And I feel like that so should not be. And like, I almost feel like the sex education system in public schools is just so not good and so shitty. It's like, but that's why I think kids feel like they need to resort to porn. And it's like, if there was just if people normalized it more, like speaking about it more, like, no, this is what sex is. You should obviously do it with someone who you are attracted to or love care about. And it's about pleasure. And like, I just think it would be
goes both ways.
Right. It would just be so much more beneficial than like you're saying, like 13-year-old boys are like, oh, so every woman wants anal, when it's like, that is not true.
Right. No, right. Exactly.
I feel like I could literally just ask you questions all day.
All day.
But we know you have to jump
I know.
at 3. Hopefully we can do this again in the coming
Absolutely.
weeks.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you back. All of this was super helpful.
Yes.
And yeah, like I
Well,
said, I could talk about this stuff all
yeah.
day.
Right. Right. Me too.
I get paid to talk about it all day.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Megan Fleming, for that insight. If you would like more from Dr. Fleming, you can follow her on Instagram at Dr. Megan, MEGAN Fleming, FLEMING, or at Twitter at Megan Fleming, spelled the same way, PhD. And I would also really highly recommend going to her website, greatlifegreatsex.com. There are 7 amazingly helpful tips to get your relationship back on track that you could sign up for right there when you go onto the website. And something that me and Sam Preet did was her 9-day pleasure challenge, which is also free, which like, how are you like making any money with all like giving away all this like free insight? But we appreciate it. And you can get that either off of her Instagram page if you go to her Linktree, which is, in her bio, or you can go to greatlifegreatsex.com/pleasure. And right there you can sign up for it as well. It was definitely super insightful for us. And this episode has been more than we can ever wish for. So thank you so, so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, I love talking about sex and relationships because I think most importantly, we're not educated in it. Going back to the sex education piece, it's the recognition. It doesn't even have to be medically accurate. Let me just tell you. So, and it's only generally about not having an STDs, STIs, right? Or getting pregnant. So this role of pleasure, owning pleasure, discovering pleasure, experiencing it with your partner, monogamy is not monotony. Like any way I have an opportunity to speak about these things, I'm really thrilled to, because I think so many people suffer from what I call foreclosure of imagination. It's like they use their own experience and they feel stuck. And, stuckness, Esther Perel, Kali would say, is sort of the rigid form of safety. So I think it's recognizing that we should always recognize that if we're stuck or something's not working, that there's always help and there's always growth opportunities. And it's really about getting clear on what we want and need and desire for ourselves.
Yeah. Right on.
So much. Yes. Oh my gosh. I want to go have sex now. What?
Yeah.
Well, go have it with yourself. Forget
Right?
the apple a day. I'm like for the orgasm a day. It's definitely got good health
Absolutely.
benefits.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. Agree.